What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Hodl My Beer. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Super excited. I have Antonio Duscio on here, author of the Bitcoin Bible. So we're going to get into that book, what he was trying to accomplish with that. We're going to cover a little bit about what's going on between the U.S. and Canada, Canada's upcoming election, all kinds of things, and kind of see how they intermix with each other here. First and foremost, guys, if you listen to the show, I don't have any sponsors on here, so all I ask for you is that you please go to opensats.org. It is essentially a charity that is funding open source development with the Bitcoin network. It's ran by Bitcoiners. There's a whole trust, multi-sig type setup that they have there, and they're allocating capital as best as they can to people that are in here day in, day out, working on the network. So with that being said, Antonio, how are you, my friend? Welcome
Thank
on.
you. Looking forward to it.
So Antonio, I want to get into good. So am I. So am I. I want to get into first and foremost, like kind of your story and like how what you did before Bitcoin, how you found all this, and then we can kind of get into the book a little
Sure.
bit.
Uh, well, I've been in the financial services industry pretty well my whole life. Uh, After I got out of university, I was recruited by an insurance company, and I sold everything from mutual funds, life insurance, disability insurance, general insurance, which includes your home and auto insurance. I did it all. Guaranteed investment certificates, and as my as my career took off, obviously I couldn't be all things to all people. You had to start to excel at certain things. And my yeah,
Absolutely.
so what I excelled at was investment planning. So I focused a lot, most of my time on mutual funds and segregated funds offered by insurance companies for the various benefits. It wasn't too long. Geez, I can't even remember the. I don't know where time goes, but I think it was around 19. Eh, yeah, exactly. Uh, I think it was around 1995, if memory serves me correctly. I was watching 60 Minutes with Morley Safer, if you remember that show or that reporter. And at the time, they did a segment on life settlements, viatical settlements. And being in the investment business, I thought, wow, this is a great idea. I knew about insurance. I knew how insurance worked. I knew about investments at the time. Uh, Believe it or not, the markets were high and going strong. And I'm thinking to myself, it can't keep going up forever. Sooner or later, there's got to be some type of correction. Interest rates at that time were very low as well. So when I saw this segment on 60 Minutes, I thought I'd do a little look-see and see what was involved. And viatical settlements were basically I somebody would buy a life insurance policy from a terminally ill individual. They'd repackage it and sell it to an investor. And I looked at it, and one thing led to another, and I ended up in the industry developing that product here in Canada. And we
So if I can cut you off real
sure.
quick to elaborate on that, because I know nothing about the space. So why would somebody in that case buy, like if somebody was terminally ill, why would it behoove an investor to buy that
Well, if
policy?
if you remember, if you recall, back in those days, AIDS was the huge thing. You know, a lot of young, a lot of
Yep.
young men, a lot of young people were contracting the disease. At the time, there weren't all these cures and cocktails that they ended up coming out with to extend their lives, and they needed money,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the United States. Let's face it, in the U.S., unless you have money, good medical care is difficult to find. Unless you got a good insurance policy, whatever.
Yep.
So there were a lot of people back then looking to sell their insurance policies, they were
Oh, so they were cashing it. They were cashing out their insurance
exactly,
policies.
you know,
Got it.
like if they had a
Got it.
policy, say for $100,000 at the time, and they were paying $50 a month into it, if you're terminally ill, you probably couldn't work anymore. So you couldn't afford one of the
Yep.
first things that falls off, you stop paying for is your insurance policy, right? A benefit that you're never going to see a benefit that you're never going to see because you're dead when it's time to collect. So people have mortgage payments.
Yep.
Just because you're terminally ill doesn't mean your mortgage payment goes away or your rent or your car payment. So what we did is turn this life insurance policy into a asset for them. So we'd offer the money up front where they could get the medical treatment they sought, or they could live out their life last dream, or they can share it amongst their family,
Yep.
whatever. But that's what we did. That's why people were looking to sell their policies at that time. And of course, the industry really grew from there. It went into seniors, where seniors and a lot of people had these huge insurance policies for estate planning reasons. And let's face it, the insurance companies don't like that, didn't like that industry because it affected their actuarial underwriting. Like if you're a young guy, if let's say 30, 35 years old, you're buying $1 million insurance policy and you're only paying $50 a month for it. That seems like a great deal. But the reason they're able to
Yep.
keep the premium so low is because they understand that most people will never carry that policy forever. They'll lapse it or they'll cancel it at some point, and the insurance company will never have to pay out. Whereas if we took over a policy or a company like ours took over a policy, we'd make sure that the premiums were paid because the investors wanted to be paid out when the event occurred, right? So for us,
Yep.
as a business, it was a win-win situation. The person that was terminally ill or very old could sell their insurance policy, turn it into an asset now, which they couldn't do with their insurance company. And for investors, they had another vehicle where they could park their investments and know that it was going to mature at some point. They had a rough guesstimate based on
Yep.
life expectancies, but they didn't know for sure. But unlike going into the stock market or going into something that was very speculative, this gave them a sort of guarantee. Insurance companies are going to pay it out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
they're
mean,
not going anywhere.
yeah. I mean, I think that's about as sure of a guarantee as you can
Absolutely.
get. Is that I don't think anybody's lived forever yet, not to my
Yeah.
knowledge. So you got into that, and then what was kind of like the catalyst for you for getting into Bitcoin? Because like by all accounts, you're a successful guy. Like you had a little bit of money. Like what was it that first turned your
Well,
attention to it?
I'm glad you bring that up because that's a double-edged sword. Because of my success, it's what kept me from studying Bitcoin and getting involved even earlier. If you can believe it, it was my younger brother that told me about Bitcoin. I can't even remember when. It had to be around really early on, maybe 2010,
Yeah.
2012. And at the time, I even recall my daughters are in the entertainment business. They were singers, they were recording. And I remember driving down to Toronto. I'm in Canada. And I remember
Yep.
driving down to Toronto, going downtown Toronto to their producer and their manager office. And the same house or office or storefront, whatever it was, I kept seeing this sign, Bitcoin here, you know. And the reason I spotted it is because my brother had told me, you got to look into this Bitcoin. But because I was so busy with my business and I was very successful with my business, I'm thinking, geez, I don't have time for that right now. Things are going so good. Why muddy the waters, right? And and
Yep.
and, and that's exactly today the reason I think a lot of so-called millionaires and billionaires aren't seriously looking at Bitcoin beyond an investment
Yeah.
because they're so secure in what they've done. They don't think they have to look anywhere else. You see, so it wasn't until
Yeah. I
go ahead.
just to pull on that thread a little bit. I think you're 100% right, and I try to get this point across. I think it's the same thing in Canada, in the U.S., with people not like comprehending other people using it in the third world, like life or death situations. You know what I mean? Like this whole, I guess, Bitcoin ethos, it responds more to need. You know, it's like a need to know thing is usually when people find it. And whether that's in the third world in regards to remittances and refugees and all that, or whether it's in places like Canada and the US where you have people who are wildly, wildly successful and they're just like, dude, my life's good. Like, why do I care? You know what I mean? But go ahead,
Well,
continue on that point.
as far as I'm concerned, you've hit the nail right on the head. And that was my whole reasoning behind really taking a deeper look at it way back then in the early stages, was because I was so successful. I didn't think there was a need for it. So I didn't pursue it to take a deeper look at it and see where it would fit in my future. And I didn't recognize I looked at it as an investment. I didn't recognize that this was going to be a whole financial system movement. The whole financial system is
Yep.
changing, and some people don't want to accept that. They don't. They don't think it's ever going to happen. They don't want to believe it. You know, but it's happening. Uh, no doubt about it.
Yep.
So in any case, it wasn't until about, geez, I back around 2008. You're going to have to excuse me going back with dates. It's crazy. I'm trying to go from
Yep.
recollection. So if my dates aren't exactly perfect, I'm just putting that disclaimer. I'm
That's
putting
fine.
that
Rough numbers
disclaimer
are
in there
good.
for you now.
Yeah.
But it wasn't then around 2009 or maybe 2012. Anyways, I ended up selling my business. So I
Got it.
retired, semi-retired, and I had this time on my hand, and that's when I started looking at Bitcoin after I was out of my business, and I started studying it and checking it out. But prior to that, because I was successful and because I had a successful business, I looked at it as an investment. And it wasn't until later, like years later, because I was out of my business and I had the time, that I started to seriously look at what Bitcoin had to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the power in all this too, that when you're first starting to look at it, people kind of fail to comprehend um, the fact that it is a financial system that can't be stopped is what makes it so powerful. Because when you first come into it, you're like, oh, this is a fun little token? How's it at 100K? And it's when I talk to people that are around me now that aren't in this space, they're like $1 million a coin, $10 million, like they can't even
Absolutely.
fathom it. You know what I mean? But when you realize it's just like slowly bleeding into every sector. I mean, from culture to politics to the actual banking system, like that's how this goes from a $1.7 trillion asset to a $70 trillion asset. To a eventually $700 trillion asset. And those numbers are, we've never had something truly scarce in the entire existence of humanity. That was in an asset form. And so it's exciting to kind of, I think at some point people's brains, even that are in the space, are going to kind of break when they see how high this thing rips. But
Well,
continue.
you're absolutely correct. It's a finite. It's not only scarce. It's a finite asset. Like you look at gold, and people can say that gold is scarce as well, or it's expensive. But what people don't realize is the reason they don't dig for gold and mine looking for more gold is because it's based on the price. If the price goes high enough,
Yep.
then the miners can make money with it. If the price of gold is too low, you're not going to get nobody digging for it because it costs them too much to look for it, right? So really, as
Yep.
far as I'm concerned, something like gold or silver, as good as those are for assets and for some security, they're not, and some scarcity, I guess, they're not finite. And we don't,
Yep. Finite's the word. You're
yeah, and we don't
100%
know that
right.
they're
You're
finite for sure.
100% right.
Like Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. You don't know what you're going to find on Mars or some meteorite. You know, look what's happened. Look what's
Yep.
happened with the diamond market over the last couple of years with lab-grown diamonds now. Like the bottom's fallen out of that whole
Mm-hmm.
marketplace because now they can make diamonds in a lab where you can't even tell the difference.
Yep. Looks the same. Everybody, nobody can tell on on your
Yeah.
ring. No, you're 100% right. So let's get in. I want to get into, so you eventually do your research, you find, you actually study this and, start to get it, I'll say. What drove you, how long between like you getting it and then you publishing the book, time
Okay.
frame wise?
Well, this this is one of the
Sorry.
this is exactly the reason
Yeah.
why I published the book. All right. I consider myself
Yeah.
pretty savvy in the investment world. And when I started looking at Bitcoin seriously, and I remember it was, at the time, the real estate crisis in the US had happened, which was around 2008, 2009. And I was buying up all
Yep.
kinds of houses and real estate in Florida because of the real estate crisis, the mortgage crisis. And I remember sitting at my house a couple years later, and it must have been around 2000. Geez, if memory serves me correctly, the first time I seriously started to look at Bitcoin, it was about $500. You see?
Yep.
And e- even though I'm looking at it, I'm still looking at it from an investment perspective. Let's face it, even if I would have got in at a penny of Bitcoin, I doubt that I would have held on to it because the way my mind frame, I didn't understand it back then. I would have looked at it completely as an investment. I would have said, wow, it went to $10 or it went to 50. I would have probably sold everything and cashed out, you know.
Yep.
But so I started, let's say around 2012. And one of the things I'm looking at Bitcoin, I want to get involved, and I don't know anything about wallets. Like even when somebody was talking
Yep.
Bitcoin at the time, my brother was telling me about Bitcoin, who's got nothing to do with investment business at all. You know, he's a small engine mechanic guy, and he was telling me about Bitcoin because he was reading about it. But even him, as promoting it to me, being the investment guy in the family, it took him till about 6 months ago to actually invest. And he was the guy telling me about it. And the problems, yeah,
Got it.
even a guy like me, yeah,
Wow.
unbelievable, right?
That's
Like you
great.
look back and you see
Yeah.
how our lives would be so much different today. But again, maybe not, because who would have held on, right? Let's be honest. It's maybe would have,
Yeah. You don't hold on until you
that's
get it. You
until
don't
you
hold on
get it,
until you
until you
get it.
understand.
Yep.
So, and that's the thing. After I started to look at this and I'm thinking, even as an investment, why not throw a couple grand at it? It's not like I can't afford to lose that, right? So, so then I'm
Yeah.
thinking, okay, I made the decision. I'm going to throw a couple grand at this and see what happens. And then I got the problem. Well, where do I buy it? I ended up looking at some offshore company. I got no idea where, somewhere in Europe, some Eastern country. Uh, I didn't know. I had to
Yep.
find out about wallets. How do I store it? Where do I save it? There was a lot involved. And like I said, even for a financial
Yeah.
guy like me, with all the experience that I had for years in the financial services industry, this was very intimidating. It was out there. So it took a long time before we actually.
I think it's still, I mean, for the record, I think it still is intimidating for a lot of people. And that's kind of been like, even for me, I mean, I'm a millennial, right? And I consider myself to be relatively tech savvy, you know, growing up with all this stuff. But I still think that that's the biggest reason that people don't self custody is they don't understand it. That's the biggest reason why people don't run nodes. They don't understand it. Like that's why for me, you know, I just started running like a home miner. Like my next step is to run a node, but it's like getting over that hump of doing it. So that's a lot of what I've been focused on in, you know, on X and all that is like how do we make this simpler for people who just are coming in to like, you know, like a three-step process. How do you show people how to save custody? How do you show people how to mine from home? And how do you show people how to run a node? Like those are the three
Yeah.
things that secures the network going forward.
So,
But go ahead.
Trey, to make a long story short, I'm a terrible date guy. I'm a terrible name guy too. Like, geez, if I meet somebody, I forget their name unless I see them like 10 times. It's just, but uh, but when it comes to certain numbers, I have no problem remembering numbers. I'm a numbers guy, right? But I
Got it.
remember looking at Bitcoin, and like I say, $500 rings a bell to me, right? And it wasn't. I didn't actually get involved and actually be in the position where I invested it till it was about $8,000 a coin. You
Got
see,
it.
that's how steep the learning curve was for me because I was doing it all by myself. And now I look
Yep.
back at uh, what I did, and I'm thinking this was so freaking simple. You know, what took me so long? Like, am I that dunce? You know, what took me so
Yeah.
long to figure this out? Like, to throw. Geez, I've lost so much money in penny stocks and all this other junk, stupid things that people wanted me. Like,
Yep.
it would have been nothing to throw $5,000, $10,000 with my business at the time at Bitcoin and just forget about it. And today, the world's your oyster, right? And
Yeah.
I never did that because it was a
Yep.
whole bunch of things that I had to do, right? And I had to learn. So as I learned about Bitcoin, and I started to tell my family and my friends and try to share it. And let's face it, because of my background, I have people come to me all the time asking. And geez, after so many years, I sat down about a year and a half ago, and I started thinking, I go, geez, you know what? Like I mentioned, my own brother that introduced me to Bitcoin, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have even got involved when I did, you know. Uh, is it still
Yep.
isn't involved, and they keep asking me the same questions. They don't know about wallets. They don't know where to buy it. Uh, they don't know how to send it. And this is all easy stuff. You know, they don't know about the simplest stuff about Bitcoin that they're ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. So I thought there's got to be a better way. And when my daughters started asking me about it, I said, you know what? I'm going to put this in writing so that they have something to refer to when they need it. And they can go back to it
Yep.
anytime. They don't have to be embarrassed that they're asking me the same questions or that they forgot something or, you know, they're not going to look like they're simpletons, right? So I said, I'm
Yep.
gonna start putting together an instruction manual, uh, and that's how this started. Was for friends and family, so that they could have something they could refer to on their own terms. Period. You know,
Yep.
and as I started putting together and looking at it and reviewing it, I'm thinking, you know what? There's so many people in this boat and they should all be involved right now. And the only thing that's keeping them back is the same thing that's keeping my friends and my family and my daughters back, and the same things that kept me back. And it's so freaking simple, you know, like it's like doing the first email back then or getting on the computer when the internet was first introduced. Like everybody looks back now and they go, what the heck was I waiting for? It's so simple. And this is the same
Yep.
thing, you know, but they just need.
Yeah, I see a lot of
No, no.
Go ahead.
I was just
Sorry.
going to say they just need a guide.
I was gonna say I see a lot of parallels with like this and the internet, as do a ton of
Sure.
people. You know what I mean? And I that's another great way I think to explain it to people. And I'm not sure if you cover this in like the later chapters of your book. I read a few of the first ones, but the like this is the protocol that everything is built on. Just like the TCP protocol for the internet, is what everything is built on. It's the thing that in the beginning, if you were one of the nerds on the internet, like early days, I say that with a ton of respect. But if you were one of the guys on the internet in the early days, there were all these different protocols that were kind of battling it out to see what would be the layer of communication, and that's what I see now with the financial system is like you have all these other coins that, obviously we know, we know enough about altcoins and shit coins, whatever you want to call them, to know that there's no, comparison. But that's how big this really has, the potential to be. One thing that I did want to get into, so you built the book as like an instruction manual, and I commend you for that too, because I know that everybody has their different spin on it. Obviously Safety has his book, which is very complex. Lynn Alden has her book, which is again very complex. Both great books, but not good starter books. And then Larry Lepard just released his, The Big Print. Similar, I think, from what I've read to your book. His is like very, very focused on the Federal Reserve, but I love the idea of like everybody sharing their own voice and how it makes sense to them, right? Because somebody could read somebody else's book and not, just whatever it is, the language of the book or how they word things, it doesn't compute. But then they could come and read yours and be like, oh shit, I get it. So I just think it's super important for people like you to continue, releasing stuff in the space. It's the same reason why I started a podcast, right? Like there's a ton of good Bitcoin podcasts out there, but maybe somebody listens to me and, something clicks that didn't click kind of before. So sorry if you've never listened to the show, I have a tendency to go on tangents.
Love it. Keep
So
going.
I go on a little rants here. No, I'm good, man. I'm good. So you wrote this as an instruction manual, to your family. How is that? Since you've released it, have you had more people around you get it?
Geez, yeah, I'm getting. Of course, I get all kinds of. I'm getting all kinds of feedback. I can tell you, even my daughters who've been involved in the ecosystem now for a couple of years because of me, even though they didn't understand what they were doing, or their husbands didn't understand what they were doing it because of me. I'm saying you have to do this. And obviously, what's happened over the last couple of years, because of my advice, they're all very happy, right? Like you see Bitcoin sitting at 85,000 US, it went up to 109, whatever. Everybody's pumped, right? But by them starting to read the book now and understanding where it came from and some of the more intricate details, like how the banking system works, how the debt level of the US, And I tried to keep it like you're so correct. All those other books are awesome books, awesome books. But I wanted something that the regular person could pick up off the street and just learn about Bitcoin. They don't need to know. They can get a general knowledge of the Federal Reserve and the debt level of the U.S. and everything else, so they understand why this was needed. But this way, they can make a difference, a proper comparison between Bitcoin and the financial system we have now. So, understand?
I think the biggest difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, there's a little bit of a lag here, but I think the biggest difference between yours and between the other ones is like for instance, the big print starts off with what the problem is. So like it's almost like you give that book to people who don't even realize there's an issue. You know what I mean? For yours, it seems like more of a instruction manual for the people who are like already asking the questions, right? Like they know things are messed up and now they're like, all right, what is
Yeah,
this thing? Like it's almost like I feel like that demographic is like more open to receiving the
yeah,
information, whereas some of these other books are like, you give it to your buddy who doesn't even know that there's a
yeah.
problem.
Well,
You know
that's
what I mean?
yeah. No,
So I
you're absolutely correct.
go
Like
ahead.
some of the simplest things. Let's face it. Unless you're in the financial services industry or you follow the business news, you follow Bloomberg or Fox News or whatever it is every day, and you see what's going on with tariffs, etc. Uh, you're oblivious to most of this stuff. What's going on with interest rates, right?
Yep.
Like a 30, you talk about even at the beginning of the book, if you recall, I talk about at the time it was 34 trillion dollar US debt. Now I think it's closer to 36 trillion. But I can uh, when I talk about that, people can't even fathom the number 34 trillion. Like it's 34,000
Yeah.
billion. So I break it down. I said, if you were to count to 34 trillion, $1 at a time, it would take you over, I forget what the number is, but it's over a million something years. Like people got no clue
Yeah.
how big that number is. They have no clue that the amount of taxes being brought in from the US can't even support the interest that's owed on that amount of debt. You know, so for people
Yeah.
that are brand new to investments or a new financial services system that we're trying to basically sell them, you have to make it really simple for them. And simple for them because they're just not
Yep.
from that's not their background. I want to talk to the athlete. I want to talk to the guy that works at the local factory at the Toyota plant or the meat packing plant, whatever. The
Yep.
car sales guy. The regular guy like me, like my daughters, like my family and my friends that sit at the local pub and share a beer once in a while and talk about all kinds of stuff. I want them to understand what's going on. And the only way you're going to do that is you can't make it a deep problem. You got to keep it very light and in a way that they're going to be able to take it in and absorb it.
Yeah. You got to meet them where they're
Absolutely.
at. You got to meet them where they're at, and that, um, I think your book does a great job of
Thank
doing
you.
that. And I think I think you've done great work there. I'm not a fan of I did order the Kindle. I'm ordering the actual book version because I'm not a big Kindle guy. But I'm excited to check out all of it. But just from, like I said, just from the first few chapters, I think it does a really good job of meeting people where they're at, which is super important because as you get into this space, the longer you're kind of in the rabbit hole, it's you get removed from like that day to day, and so
It's funny. It's funny.
it's a challenge, I
It's
think.
funny you mentioned that. I'm in the same boat as you. It must be because of my age or something, but I like to have an actual physical copy of something. When I tell all my friends and my family, you're going to read it the first time. It's going to seem really simple, but there's a lot of stuff that you have to really let sink in. You know, and I like
Yep.
something where I can refer to it, go back to it. I can highlight it, certain things. You know. Uh, and like the book, like I said, it explains where Bitcoin comes from. It gives you the very high view of Bitcoin, why the scarcity, why it's good for you. Then I walk you through how to get involved in the ecosystem, how to sign up with an exchange, maybe a good wallet. I talk about one of the wallets in there. There's many wallets, but I had to
Yep.
choose one that I know most of my people use, and it's simple for them to know. And then I talk about what's going on. And it's funny with the involvement from ETFs and President Trump talking about reserves, and uh, I was fortunate enough to be able to include a lot of that stuff in the book. And then I ended off just like the Bible. I called it the Bitcoin Bible on purpose because I start in the beginning and then I ended off with my prophecy at the end, what I think we're going to be at. You know. So,
Yep.
uh,
I love
yeah,
that. Yeah. Um, So I think that's a good transition point. So Trump brought up obviously they've been doing it's, and again, I don't think it's really, he gets it to some degree, I think, but I think it's more the people around him, that really understand it. Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, David Sachs, all of those guys that are kind of around him. But let's kind of shift gears a little bit to the overall, I guess, political, sphere here. What are your thoughts on like the administration, good, bad, anything, being that you're someone who's in Canada?
Well, okay, at the risk of losing a lot of people here, I think Trump is the best thing that could have happened for the U.S. at this particular time. Uh, I remember, years ago, before I was in business and going through high school and everything else, I had a very good teacher, mentor, and he always told me, surround yourself with peer and above. If you want to be a millionaire, you're not going to take advice from a guy that's working at the local factory. You want to hang around with those type of people. When you get into a business and your business grows, which was one of the secrets to my success. And we were growing. I had offices in Europe, in Austria. I had an office in Florida, right? With all kinds. I always hired people that I thought were a lot smarter than me. They could bring
Smart way to do it.
they could bring a lot more to the table. And so many people are afraid to do that. And I think President Trump, I gotta show him the due respect, is in that orbit. He may not know everything, but let's face it, he surrounds himself with great people, right? From his press secretary right up to everybody he's appointed to his cabinet, right? These are fantastic people. He doesn't have to be the guru on everything. He just has to surround himself with the right people.
Yep.
And, he's a successful businessman because I think he's done that his whole life. He's surrounded himself with good people, and they've been able to grow his business. And I think he's going to be able to do the same thing for the United States. And for the crypto industry, he sees the opportunity and what this could do for the United States. He wants to keep the U.S. at the forefront of the financial services industry. He doesn't want the dollar to be replaced by the BRICS nations and whatever they're concocting over there. He wants to remain that superpower. And he may have to make some short-term sacrifices, which I think he's doing now by talking about a lot of the things that he's talking about. But hopefully in the future, it's going to work out. But let's face it, like him or dislike him, this man has taken a completely different path than any other leader that we've had in Canada or the U.S. forever. Like this man.
Or Europe for that matter. Yeah, I agree.
Like, this man actually does what he says he's going to do, and even if it's against the grain. Like you see what happened in Europe recently in the, German election? The guy that got elected said he was going to do something, and then next day, as soon as he's in office, boom, complete opposite, right? I don't want to talk out of turn, but I think it was something to do with allowing immigrants into the country, right? So, but
yeah, well, Europe's struggling mightily, mightily with that issue because they're all so connected, So like when you have, I'm very curious what boots on the ground looks like in there, and I'm sure it differs nation by nation, but it seems like a lot of those nations are having the same problem. So, I agree with all the points you said on what Trump's doing. I don't think it's perfect. I still don't trust politicians. Don't trust, verify, as we say in the Bitcoin community. But, I do think that a lot of, what has been done currently has been a net positive. I think the way that he structured the reserve versus the digital asset stockpile, and it's such a small bet for the U.S. to like front run this thing. They gave away billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. They piss away billions and billions of dollars all the time. So now you have the language of, quote unquote, budget neutral, which can literally mean anything. You know what I mean? You cut, but that's what I love about that is budget neutral can mean, hey, we cut $100 billion here, we're spending it here, and now you can front run, Bitcoin, with that money. They didn't say deficit neutral, right? They didn't say we're going to get out of a deficit and then buy it, and I think that was a big distinction. And again, they're just throwing around so much money. I just, the reason that I want them to lead, and again, I don't care if it was European, the European Union or the U.S. or Canada. You just don't want Russia and China to lead the way, and I think that's the biggest thing with all of this stuff. So that's why I view it as a net positive. Obviously, if you're living in North America, whether it's Canada, Mexico, or the U.S., you would probably want somebody in North America to be front running this thing, not somebody on the other side of the world, especially, somewhere as unstable as China or Russia, for instance. So that's why I was a big fan of it. Do you have any opinions? Canada has an election coming up, right? Between Carney, is it Carney and Poilievre?
Those two are supposedly the two front runners right now. The election is scheduled for April 28th. I'm pretty sure.
Got it. Is it a two-party, like, is it as two-party oriented as it is in the U.S.?
No, here in Canada, we have several parties. The two parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, you could say are the front runners, or were the front runners. But there's also the NDP, the New Democratic Party, which is a more socialist type looking party.
Yep.
You have the Green Party, which you can pretty well surmise what that's all about. And then you've got this new party over the last, I guess, 2 elections or so, with Maxime Bernier as the leader of the party, the PPC, the People's Party of Canada. And they're along the very conservative, I'd say even more conservative than Poilievre's Conservatives. The problem with them, if it's a problem, is that people don't believe that they're going to be able to win this time. So if you vote for them, or if you vote for Maxime, you may be splitting the vote between the PPC and the Conservatives, which allows the Liberals to slide up the middle again. But, everybody's vote is their decision. Me, I don't vote based on whether a party is going to be split. I vote for the person and the party that I think is going to do the best job for the country, right? So, let's face it. Donald Trump has won 2 elections. Nobody thought he would, but he was able to get in there.
Yeah.
So anything is possible. You just don't know the resolve of the public, right? You said a lot in that leading up to this. One of the things that, you mentioned Ukraine, all the money that's going to Ukraine from the States, even Canada, that they're the 4th or 5th largest holders of Bitcoin as far as a nation state is concerned. So why are we sending all this money when they have all this Bitcoin reserve?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that rabbit hole goes so we could talk for another hour on that, man.
You think?
Yeah, I know. I think that's a whole, that might have to be episode 2 that we do if these shenanigans are still going on. No, the only reason I asked about the Canadian election coming up is because I've been following Pierre for a few years now. And again, I know he's somewhat of a career politician, but I do like him a lot. And I think that while him and Trump are going to butt heads, as they both want the best things for their country, I think that he would be a very, very, very big improvement over Trudeau. I know you're in Canada, but I'm not. I don't want to mince words. I think that based off of all of Canada's resources, the issues that you have going on were just gross mismanagement by the Trudeau administration. And I think it was sad to see, man. So I'm hoping for you guys that it's, whether it's Maxine or Pierre, I'm hoping that, um, the country gets back to kind of like sound money, not sound money principles, but more conservative ideologies, because I think that would benefit a lot of
Yeah,
people there.
we've wasted so much money and time on this DEI stuff, and let's. You're completely correct. 100% mismanagement. Like from the pipeline, which was canceled years ago, right on down to apps for COVID. There's been so much
Yep.
corruption, and I don't know who you're going to get or how that's ever going to be resolved. Uh, like in the U.S., Trump has Elon Musk and Doge crew going at it, uncovering a lot of this fraud and abuse, right? But that's what we need here in Canada. But even if we have something like that, let's face it, it's never going to go away until you make examples of that fraud and mismanagement. If we're going to allow that to
Yeah.
continue, or if we're going to allow that to happen, even though we've uncovered it with just a slap on the hand, where somebody like you and I would be locked up forever, uh, and, this
Yep.
issue's never going to go away. You're always going to have name recognition politics. Let's face it, Trudeau was a school teacher. He's got no background in business, no background, nothing, but because his father was a prime minister, he had name recognition. He got into office, right? And until
Yep.
until we get over that, well, you've had the same issue in the States, the Bushes. Uh, you can go right
Yeah.
down the line, right? But until we as the
Yep.
public actually get fed up and actually do something about it and make examples of these rogue politicians, it's not going to change. And
Yeah. What I will say though about you guys is a lot of this stuff gets solved quicker. Not the waste and abuse and the fraud and that stuff. Like that's going to take a while to root out. But as far as like prosperity for the people, a lot of that can be solved by allowing people to build homes, by taking away some of those restrictions, by allowing people to drill and use the natural resources that are available to them. And Canada's in a unique position like the US where there's so many, like they're so resource rich, that like I think the turnaround could happen quicker. You're 100% right that, you know, taking out all of this rot, much like we have in the US, is going to take some time, and it's going to demand people being fed up. But, the actual turnaround for like Canadian quality of life to me can happen a lot quicker with just the right people in
oh, no
place.
doubt, no doubt about that. We are
Yeah.
resource rich, but the management of those resources is what's killing Canadians. I'll tell you,
Have you seen so have you seen the like have you noticed, food or welfare lines being around the corner in cities? I mean like that's what gets, when I see like whether it's from Pierre or whether it's from Jordan Peterson or any number of more conservative Canadians that I follow on a daily basis. Have you seen kind of things get worse in the cities, or are you so like are you in like the suburbs or you don't even
no,
notice it?
I'll tell. If you allow me a few minutes, I'm gonna tell you a great story. Uh, I have a dog, so I walk him every day. And this where I'm living right now, I've been here now for about 4 years, and every day I take my dog for a walk, and I'm walking up and down, and I hear Trudeau and the government's talking about building all these extra homes and subsidizing and getting all this money into getting us more homes. But I'm walking around and I'm noticing homes, townhouses, brand new, that have been empty for years, for sale signs. I've even got videos. I can post videos that show you the exact dates when I took those videos and talked about it and saying these things are empty. I don't know why they're talking about putting more money into infrastructure, putting more money into building more homes, but they can't even sell what they have here. So that to me was a symptom. That's a problem. Why are you talking about building homes? It's like the Chinese thing, right? In China, you got all these empty cities. And the reason they're empty is because the government builds these things. They keep people employed. They're the biggest employers. So everything looks hunky dory, but there's nobody buying them. Then they tear them down years later and do it again. And that's like almost the model that it seemed that Trudeau wanted to take us here. And I can take you on that same walk today, and I can play the video. And most of those places, if not more, are even for sale now because of what's happened with interest rates and what's happened with inflation. And
So, so the reason they're for sale and they're empty is because of housing unaffordability, not because the housing isn't
no,
there.
there's lots of housing. There's lots of housing. It's affordability, number one. And anybody telling you otherwise either doesn't know what they're talking about or they're just straight up lying. Uh, I've been around the block,
Got it.
and I mean I've been around the block. I know what it is, and there's people there's
Yeah.
people losing their homes. It's not 2008 yet. I think we're close. Uh, Canada never experienced
Yeah.
Canada never experienced what you did in the U.S. there, especially Florida, Nevada, some of those states back in 2008, 2009, with the short sales and the foreclosures. But every day I see homes here that are selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than what they were purchased for just a few years back. People can't afford the mortgages. The mortgages are coming up
It's
for
insane.
renewal. The interest rates have changed substantially in the last 3, 4 years. So it is an affordable.
Yeah, I mean yeah, it's an affordability thing. That makes sense. It's very interesting. I haven't heard, again, I haven't heard like boots on the ground what's actually going on. But that seems to be the case. With and I think something that you brought up there that was super interesting is you said that the economy almost, and these weren't your exact words, so if I'm getting this wrong, let me know. But essentially the economy has been propped up by government
Yeah,
jobs and the like it's not actual growth. And that's what we're seeing in the US now. Like they just the reason the markets are so shaky here is because they're going through and they're cutting all this fraud, waste, and abuse. And it's coming out that most of the job creation while the Biden administration was in office, like was government jobs created to prop up the economy so that they could get reelected again. So it's all these,
absolutely. And you
yeah,
know what? I wasn't prepared for this conversation to go in this direction today. But if you go back even uh, every month every quarter, whatever it was in the States there, I probably follow US news more than I follow Canadian news. But when they come out with the employment numbers, they'd always have these great employment numbers. And then they'd quietly readjust them a couple months down the road when the new numbers came down. At the end of the year, you realize that many jobs were not created, but nobody knew about it. The press, the mainstream media was so happy to talk about all these great jobs that Biden and his regime were creating, but it was all a smokescreen. It wasn't true, you know, and nobody.
yeah. The private the private sector is where people actually, um, where people actually gain freedom. The public sector is not where that happens. Because as soon as you stop parroting the public, whatever the government narrative is, you lose your job. You're not actually free to, go to work and make a living and kind of speak your mind. And so I think that's a huge thing that we're trying to sort out here. But I have a feeling all of this stuff is happening in Europe. It's happening in Canada. And, we can tie this back. Obviously, all roads lead to Bitcoin. We can tie this back to Bitcoin. And my hope is that like in the US, there's a very big case to be made that the Bitcoin and general cryptocurrency uh, block of voters swung this election.
Yep.
And my hope is that continues to radiate, through other countries as this movement continues to grow. And my hope for the U.S. is that next, in 4 years, we're looking at a new Democratic Party that's also Bitcoin friendly, that's also lobbying to protect for self-custody and all of these things within the industry. And I believe that's going to have to be the case, right? They're going to have to reinvent themselves in order to keep up, because if they continue down the same road that they continued on with Operation Choke Point, they're going to continue to get smoked in every upcoming election that comes up. So that's my hope, is that it keeps politicians more honest.
I agree with you. They're going to have to do something. I think with what's going on in the U.S. right now within the crypto industry, what's going on there, it's going to be pretty tough 4 years from now to try and turn that boat again. And you can see it with what's going on right now, even with certain players. Let's face it, when I first started looking at Bitcoin and all the so-called computer geeks that were involved with Bitcoin and understood it, compared to where we're at today with nation states, the MicroStrategies of the world, or strategy, whatever he's referring to it as now, with ETFs, the BlackRocks and the Vanguard, the VanEck, it's a whole different player participating. And these people aren't your regular type of participant. Like where you and I will talk about it, let's face it, Larry Fink from BlackRock, Jamie Dimon,
Yep.
From the name
Chase.
Yeah.
Chase
Chase
Bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're telling you one thing, but they're doing something completely the opposite. And you're seeing that with the IMF right now as well. They're telling the U.S., they're telling the United Arab Emirates, to El Salvador to get away from Bitcoin. But in the meantime, they're changing their talking points in their own documentation to start accepting this new financial system. And it's funny you mentioned Europe. I do quite a bit of traveling to Europe as well. And I was in Italy just a couple months ago, and you would not believe how people do not know or do not understand Bitcoin yet. It is so rare. I have an uncle who's actually younger than I am, but he's a school teacher. And he was asking me to explain Bitcoin to him because his students were talking about Bitcoin. He had no idea what it was. You see? So I'm educating, but the level of apathy in Europe towards the crypto industry and Bitcoin is unbelievable. Like, you have to be there. You have to actually say, like you put it, boots on the ground, to understand what I'm talking about. Like, you think it's a low participation rate here in Canada or the US. It's ridiculously low over there. When people say we're early, we are early, and
Well, the problem that I find with the like the issues going on with Europe in general is, like, most people, like you said, the apathy there, I think it's more of like, and again, it's not in all cases, I understand that, but like the general population, the apathy there is so big that, like, they don't even understand what's going on from a censorship perspective, a lot of them. You know what I mean? Until it happens to them. And I think that that's the general issue. Like, you have, like, the US, for instance, I think her name's Christina Lagarde, the one that she runs the European Central Bank. I think I believe that's her name. She comes out talking about a central bank, European central bank digital currency, and there was no, like, mainstream outroar when the U.S. tossed the idea around a few years back. Everybody was like, respectfully, like, fuck this. We're not You know what I mean? We're not going down this road. And I think that that's also part of the reason that Europe, as great as it is, has fallen so far, is just the general apathy. And I do hope that turns around. And again, I think the U.S. kind of leading the way in that maybe helps wake, some of this stuff up, overseas.
What the U.S. does, I think most states are going to follow. Let's face it, even states like China that are telling you they're not mining or it's illegal, or if one day it's illegal, then it's illegal. Bitcoin's legal one day, and I wouldn't be surprised that these states like China have been accumulating undercover. If you look at the chain analysis, and you see like there's somebody out there buying like hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin every couple months or whatever. Nobody knows who it is yet. Well, to me, that's going to be a nation state with that type of money, right? Somebody's positioning themselves. Russia has lived through these sanctions. They've survived and they thrived through these sanctions, and that's got to be because of decentralization and Bitcoin or some type of participation in that type of market. The U.S. made a big mistake by weaponizing the dollar. And I think a lot of these other nations saw that. And to themselves, they're saying, we're not going to allow this to happen again. They started to position themselves. And I believe that President Trump knows this and is trying to react to stay ahead of that curve, to not let these other nation states beat him to the punch. That's a belief that I have. You can't prove it. And the other thing about
no, you can't prove it, but that would be, that would be the smart thing to do. And I also think too, for what it's worth, like you can't, we've seen experiments with global reserve currencies before, and what it ends up doing is exactly what's going on in America right now. You've completely hollowed out your infrastructure to try to keep the dollar cheaper. And that's why nothing's made here anymore. And that's why it seems like he's threatening with the tariffs and stuff like that. And then, I think it was just today, he says, hey, we're going to push them off a little bit longer. Like, I think what he's doing is buying time to try to get manufacturing and investment back in the U.S. And then eventually, by that time, if they've already accumulated enough, like whatever happens to the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency happens. But like, you can't, it's a literal national security risk to not have things like computer chips here, to not manufacture anything on your own soil. Like now you're relying on all of these other nations to do it. And that's just not, that's not the way to build a flourishing, society.
Absolutely. Even Hyundai, I think, announced today that they're going to be doing some big steel investment in the U.S. Like in the time that Trump has been in office, there's been quite a few announcements in that regard. And if they do want to keep, if they want to keep the U.S. dollar positioned as the world reserve currency, then I think it's beyond the line now where they're going to have to show that there's something actually backing it, like Bitcoin or gold, like they were talking about. This audit at the Fort Knox, which all of a sudden has gone quiet. But with everything that's going on with decentralization now, and people start to understand decentralization, if the U.S. wants to stay at that forefront, they will have to have significant reserves. And I think Bitcoin's going to play a huge, huge part of all of that. I hope it does anyways.
Yeah, it seems like it, because if we don't, somebody else is going to. But the other thing too, like you said, you have now, BlackRock involved in it. You have the ETFs. You have so many areas where people are invested into the asset by proxy that, going back to the whole presidential debate or presidential candidacy in 4 years, like, there's so much money that's going to be in this asset by then that nobody is going to run on a campaign against it. You know, I think in 4 years we're going to be deliberating, who is more pro
Yeah.
Bitcoin, and that Overton window continues to
Yeah.
shift. And ultimately, the reason I love that is because it's, like I said, it's shifting in the direction of transparency. It's shifting in the direction of, decentralization, and it's shifting in the direction of the individual. And I think that's what's so powerful for it, is that everybody's life is going to get better. And that's the power of Bitcoin, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, even you we just talked about public companies. We're talking about these big name companies and everything else, but there's a ton of public companies now buying Bitcoin for their balance sheets. Whereas a couple of years ago, it was insignificant. How many public companies are out there? In the book, I even talk about millionaires. How many millionaires in the world? How many millionaires in the U.S. alone? There isn't Bitcoin for all of them. It's and
Yep.
and like I said, it's the thing has shifted from the computer geeks owning Bitcoin, getting Bitcoin from playing games or whatever. It's the shift is happening in real strong hands now, and it's going to be sitting on somebody's balance sheet for a long time. Uh, and you can't let the $100,000 price tag right now. And that's where it comes back to the thinking again. Is people look at this, they go, "Wow, one Bitcoin, $100,000. That's way high. It's probably going to go down." No, actually, it's real low. Like you can't give it a value like that until you understand the concept of Bitcoin. $100,000 shouldn't be scaring nobody. Don't worry about the value of Bitcoin compared to the US dollar. What should be concerning you is how much of it can you accumulate right now, and put aside somewhere. That's
Yeah.
that's the number one should be looking at.
Yep. Again, we have a lot of sayings in this community, but as long as, fiat currency has no bottom, then Bitcoin has no top, and that's the point that, we always try to make. I want to be respectful of your time here. Anything, I know we got into some areas that you maybe weren't expecting, but anything that we didn't touch on that you want to bring up, or
I think we've said enough.
we hit just
Yeah,
about
but
all of it
we can
from
keep talking about all kinds of stuff all night long. At the end of the
yeah.
at the end of the day, I think it's important that people learn about what decentralization actually means. What self custody actually means, and once they understand that, I think that a lot of light bulbs are going to go off. you know. But until now,
Yep.
we've never had any asset that was decentralized and you could control completely. You see, you're in that position to be able to do that, and that's where the world is headed. You mentioned Europe again. Like in Europe, you can go to jail now if you pay somebody more than I think it's €1,000 in cash. You can't even do that. So they want to control everything, even though they're bringing in the central bank digital currency. It's a form of control. Decentralization and the transparency of blockchain resolves all that. And we're even with our governments, blockchain technology can solve most of our issues from elections to where the money is spent. It's a live ledger, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, where anybody can see what's going on within your own government. So it's very
Yeah.
important that people learn about decentralization and blockchain and what it actually means.
Yep. I couldn't agree with you more. So with that being said, we'll bring it to the close. This was a lot of fun having you on, man. I hope you had a good time. I definitely did. Why don't you tell people where they can find you, and then where they can find your book as well, and I'll add your X profile into the show notes
Hey,
as well.
thank you very much. I appreciate the support from everybody. Like I said, the book is a very high level look at Bitcoin and the economy of Bitcoin and how to get people involved in the system. I think it's the ultimate instruction manual, the ultimate orange pill. I think if you have anybody that's you want to get involved in the ecosystem, give them the book. It's something they can refer to on their own and keep going back to it. Period. Uh, the book is available everywhere books are sold: Indigo, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. Uh, I can be.
And guys, it's called the
It's called.
Bitcoin
It's
Bible
called.
again,
Yeah,
just so
it's
you
called
have
the
it.
Bitcoin Bible, and I can be found at antonioduscio.com, my name.com. If somebody wants to reach out to me, or on X, I'm on X as well. Same handle. I welcome any feedback, good or bad. I have broad shoulders. I can handle it, you know. And and
I
yeah,
love it, man.
I
Well,
appreciate the feedback. And my goal is we talk about. You mentioned earlier the government, like the U.S. front running all these other countries. I think the regular person is still in the position of front run the governments, nation states, these big public companies, these ETFs. They still have a huge opportunity. They just got to understand what Bitcoin is and how to get involved. I want to help people do that. I think I can change a lot of people's lives by getting them involved in the ecosystem now. Don't let that $100,000 price tag scare you one bit. It's just the beginning.
I love it, man. That's a great point. We are still so early. So thank you again, Antonio, for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you on here. And thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank
Talk
you.
soon.